Morning, Michael.
Hello, Peter.
We ended up talking about the education work at the Globe, and then during that time, your work at the RSC, and the slightly unfortunate ending of your relationship at the RSC when you were about to do a production of Much Ado About Nothing. And we are into a new chapter now, and just sort of tell us where you go from there.
All right. We're now in the 200s, 2000s, as it were, you know, not the teens, but the one, two, threes. Okay. And so I did this work at the Globe over a period of about 5 or 6 years. I did 5 productions. And then I started to get a bit bored with myself, a little bit bored with the students, because I don't know if this came into our official conversations, but I was talking about how um, unexploratory the students became year after year after year for the last 20, 25 years, getting more and more conformist and anxious to get it right and not taking risks with improvisations, wanting to please me, and so forth, looking for results when I wasn't giving them results. And I've and also I was tired of the sort of traveling down there and the awkward hours. I had to work with them, sort of late afternoons into the evening, which is not good for me. And it was a lot of travel time and then working on the stage in cold winter days and so forth. So anyway, I sort of gradually removed myself from that by giving them a few classes, but not doing the productions. And then there was a period of about 3 years when actually I didn't do any productions at all. And I think I felt I was tired and getting too old to do productions. And I was observing other directors at this age, the ones that kept going, and their work was really awful. I don't think old directors usually improve with age. They're not like bottles of wine or something. There's something, Peter Hall, with all due respect, he kept working up to the very last minute, and the productions were really getting worse and worse and worse all the time. And he fell asleep in rehearsal, so I was told. This is all gossip, and not meant cruelly. And I thought, well, enough, and let me just do teaching, do workshops, because I have to say that all through my career, and especially through this period, I was doing lots and lots of workshops. I was always teaching at weekends or for a week or for a day or for a half day, so that's sort of my life was going on working with people. And also, I think I started to talk to you about the fact that about 25 years earlier, Nick Hearn had said, why don't you write a book? Mm-hmm. And it had never happened. And then I did talk to you about this, but briefly go over it. I went to work at Dulwich, at Dartmouth College in the States, and I started writing what became Different Every Night. And I sort of broke, I went through a barrier there. I crossed the point of no return, and I thought, now I'm going to do it. So I kept on with it, and I hadn't been commissioned at this point by Nick Hearn because I think he'd slightly given up on me. So I did a draft and sent it to him, and he liked it very much, and I just kept working on it. And it was eventually published in 2011, I think, or 2012. Okay. And so that kept me very busy as well, trying to describe my rehearsal process. It was very much explaining how I'd got to where I'd got with the work I did, my sort of philosophy about theatre and the practical application of trying to achieve what I wanted, that is, the freedom of the actor on stage, which I hope we'll talk about in more detail specifically. And it took a long time because I wanted to be very accurate. I've got shelves full of acting books, and most of them tell me nothing because if they set up exercises, you go with it and then you think, yes, and what was that for? And so what? And there's always something missing. And I thought, because they're not being specific enough. And so I took a lot of time to describe the exercises because in rehearsal, you can wave your arms around and say to the actors, do you know what I mean? But you can't do that with a book. So I got more and more specific and I was very accurate about it. And the book was published and it's a great success. It really is used. That was one of the nicest things that happened. It's on most curricula, schedules. Most drama schools, make students use it or refer to it. And its sales have been quite nice over the years. I managed to work out my advance royalties, which was a great achievement, and then actually get a little check every 6 months. Not great, but it ticks over at a fairly regular rate, and and it's out there. But the funny thing is, I couldn't wait to see it in a bookshop. I thought it would be so exciting to see my name. And I went into a bookshop and there it was. And I thought, oh, it wasn't as exciting as I thought it was going to be. Maybe I'd anticipated it all, but it was so funny because I thought, oh, it'd be so wonderful to go to the bookshop and see your book on a shelf. And there it was. Anyway, so that kept me very busy. Now, simultaneous with this, and this is personal stuff, I was in my, mid-60s? Mid-70s, 76, 77. And I was starting to feel those sort of insecurities about traveling, going abroad too much. And the last time I'd been abroad was to Stratford, Ontario, to do a 2-week or a week workshop there. I can't remember how long. And I know I had to sort of psych myself up to get to the airport and get on, because I think because of technology and having to check in online and all those sort of things, I suddenly felt overwhelmed that I'd suddenly get very tired on my travels and fall down or something. I mean, most of it was very subjective and actually not true at all. And so I was becoming a little bit hermetic, hermetically sealed off, recluse, a hermit. And I'd worked a lot with a wonderful woman who's also a wonderful actress called Jane Arnfield. And she now lived in Northumberland and become a professor of acting at Northumbria University. She was a teacher, she wasn't a professor. And she would regularly contact me and talk to me. We had a very nice relationship. And one day she said to me, look, would you read this memoir I've been given by a Holocaust survivor called Zdenka Fantlova. I know I should know Zdenka Fantlova. A Holocaust survivor called Zdenka Fantlova. And I think it would make a wonderful solo piece for me because I love teaching and all that it requires and demands of me, but I still yearn to perform, and I'd love to create a woman piece. Really look at it. How she'd met this woman is that Jane had somehow been chairing or running the Holocaust Day in Northumbria, in Newcastle for some reason. She's not Jewish. And I read it, and it was very interesting, and the woman herself was very interesting. I mean, we have a lot of information about how horrible the Holocaust was and all the ghastly atrocities that happened, but it was this woman's spirit and her attitude to everything that was very special. And I said, yes, if you like it, good, good luck, you see. Now, Jane, who's very artful, about a month or 2 months later said, Mike, would you help me with the adaptation? I'll come. And I said, okay, Jane, all right. Yes. Yeah, if it would help, I'll give you a few pointers. Anyway, I ended up more or less doing the adaptation for her, you see. And then she said to me, oh, I've got some seeding money and I could give 2 or 3 performances of a sort of work in progress. Would you even consider coming up to Newcastle for a week and just rehearsing me, for about a half an hour of it? And I said, yes, Jane, I suppose so. And I got hooked into this wonderful project, which became absolutely important to me in all sorts of ways. And what was interesting, how are we going to find a half-hour piece out of all the material? And that was one of those it was one of those projects, I have to say, which because I wasn't anxious to do it, because there wasn't a time challenge, you know, you've got to get it done by this. It was very relaxed. It was always, let's see what happens with the next stage, let's see. And it just flowed with patience. It took us about 3 years, I suppose, even more, to finally get to a final final production of it fully. But it was a very healthy and nice way of working, you know, that you don't make ridiculous demands. You travel in hope, realizing that you may not arrive, you know. So um, I found a very nice way of splitting the material, not chronologically, so there were themes running through it. And one was about her relationship with a young man. She was a 21-year-old woman when she went into the Holocaust, and she just started a relationship with a very nice young man. They were Hungarian. No, what was I saying? Czechoslovakian Jews. And he was also taken into a camp, and they were separated, and then he was exterminated at some point, which she didn't find out for years later. So I just took that thread of that as a little piece, you see, and we did it. And it worked wonderfully. I mean, we did it in 5 days. I don't know how Jane learned all the lines. We did it in an empty space with just her. And we also explored, which interests me tremendously, telling stories, whose viewpoint. So occasionally she was herself, Jane, saying, hello, good evening. I'm going to tell you the story about Zdenka Fantlova, which took place between 1934 and 1945. And then she would, in different ways, embody the character. Sometimes she talked about I, sometimes she talked about she. And it worked very, very nicely. And it was quite physical. And she had one chair. And she had a sort of 1940s dress and shoes. And it worked wonderfully. And it got such a nice response that we decided to go on with it. And she managed to raise money to do a full production of it, which actually ended up being about an hour, 10 minutes. And so I had another long period when I went up to Newcastle, Northumbria University. And it was during the summer when the college was fairly empty, and she had the use of this wonderful studio to herself. And so we'd rehearse, we'd start at, I don't know, 9 or 9:30 in the morning, and we'd go on until we'd had enough. I mean, she had a son and she had to pick him up from school and things like that. But it was a very nice process, and there was no rush, lots of time. And we really worked in great detail. And to cut a very long story short, it opened, I can't remember exactly, I think 2012, 13. I'm going to pause here and take a look. We finally did our first production in 2011. So she'd been talking to me for 3 years, I think, then. And it became one of those wonderful things for her. She was invited all over the world. She went to Canada, to New York, to India, to Australia, to Holland, to Norway. She just kept traveling with this show. And we even did it at the Houses of Parliament because one of the members of the House of Lords was from Newcastle and knew her and had seen it in Newcastle and thought and pushed it. So it had a lot of prestige, and it had a little run in London at the South Bank Centre. And she still performs occasionally, even now. And it was a great success. And we got very excited about this. So a few years later, she said, I'd love to do something else with you. And I said, yes, what should we do? Something different. And we found a novel called Year of Wonder. And it's about, ironically now, about the plague. You know, 1640, whatever it was, 44, 45. And it's written from the viewpoint of a young woman in, now I'm going to forget all the names because I should know them perfectly well, but I don't. Yes, there was actually there was a village called Eam, or Eam, E-Y-A-M, yeah, and the priest or the vicar there at that time decided they should shut themselves off from the rest of the world, contain the plague, and and protect the outside world from them. And they were fed by food being left on the borders of the town and so forth. And it's about a young woman who's a servant. She's the widow of a miner. And it's also about a woman finding her own identity and usefulness, and she becomes a midwife, and it ends in a very magical way somewhere else totally different, which I won't go into. And it seemed like a really good thing to adapt. And again, we adapted it, we had long rehearsals, and we opened at the Lowry, I think, I'll have to pause again. 2018. So there was a big jump between the two. There was a 7-year jump. Okay. And and so we extended our skills, and this was much more emotionally laden and sort of vivid, and there were lots of other characters. So she had to talk about the other characters and embody them, although it was in the first person of this character. And so we explored a lot of techniques, and it was much more physical. Instead of having a chair, we had a very long table, one of those very long wooden antique dining tables. And she climbed on it, and she got under it, she did all sorts of things. And that also went wonderfully well. And so this was a very nice experience, because I hadn't ever particularly liked one-person shows, because I like to watch the interaction between actors on stage. There's a couple of exceptions to that. One was Emlyn Williams doing Dickens readings, and there was a Robert Lepage play called Needles and Opium, piece he did himself, and they were just brilliant. But it was difficult for Jane because she had me to look at all the time. She had nobody else to play off. So it was difficult for her to find her freedom, but we found it anyway. So that was a very nice experience and totally unexpected. And what she did, she gave me courage to start directing again, because I thought, oh, I actually am all right. I didn't send people to sleep with these two shows. I can actually work. That's wonderful. And by some very nice coincidence, in 2014, I was invited by East 15 to do a production for them with their third year students. And I thought, oh my God, that train journey down, almost repping it, on the central line, I'll be exhausted, old man that I am. Oh my God, it's so far. And I thought, Michael, you must do it. You must do it. Don't. And I did Blood Wedding with them. Really nice year. And it went very, very well. I was very proud of it, and people came to see it. And simultaneously with that, Christian Burgess, who was then running the Guildhall acting school, said, would you come and do a production, an internal production with our first years, their final Shakespeare showing or something, almost immediately afterwards. And I said, yes, because Guildhall I could almost work to. So I went to Guildhall and did the Comedy of Errors again. And it was great fun, and it was moving. And again, it works. And I thought, okay, you're still functioning. Yeah, good, that's okay. You can go on. And so for the next 3 or 4 years, I did about another 3 or 4 productions for Guildhall. I did Dealer's Choice by Patrick Marber, which is a really quite profound and wonderful play with a group of 5 boys. And it's about poker. And 2 of them, but this is when life is good to you and everything falls into place, were poker players.
Okay.
And they knew how it worked. They knew, and they taught the other 3, and they used to sit, bless them, after 8 hours of rehearsal and play poker. So all the the stuff was absolutely authentic and accurate and natural for them. But, you know, so that was a great pleasure. And I did a so-so production of Twelfth Night. It was okay. It's all right. I had a nice idea about it, and I think it came, you know, through. And then I did The Crucible, which I was rather pleased with. So those are the productions I did more or less up to date. Then,
I'm going to interrupt you because I remember talking to you when you were doing the Marber, when you were doing Dealer's Choice. And you kind of forged a relationship with Patrick Marber because you said that there were certain bits that you weren't certain about. And
yes, I felt, you see, he's a brilliant comic writer. He's written sitcoms, you know, but he's also a serious playwright. But this was his first play, I think, his first full-length play. And there were, he'd set up jokes in it which didn't quite justify the setting up. And I did query them. And he said, no, if you want to, cut them. So that was very nice of him. There were only 2 or 3 of them. There weren't a lot. But I thought, how can an actor justify giving a fee to another actor? Do you know what I mean? For me, it was very obvious and it was fine. It didn't lose anything at all. And right at the beginning, he made jokes about a character that was never seen again. And I said, it's so early in the play, it's 3 lines in, you know, I think we can dispense with that anyway. But he was very nice. And he did urge me to try and do it elsewhere. I mean, he came to see a dress rehearsal, which was deadly and awful. It was in an empty, you know, studio. And then I thought, oh, that's it. And then he came to the last night and it was wonderful. And he embraced me warmly and went away very excited. So that was nice. So it ended well. And then I never knew when I was going to be invited by Guildhall. There were gaps and everything. Oh, they're not going to ask me back. And then this went on and on. And I started to feel, oh God, have I blotted my copybook? And then, of course, these huge drama school changes were starting to take place. Chris Burgess resigned. The wonderful man who was running the entire, you know, Guildhall, the music and theatre department, left, and he was replaced by a woman who wanted to be very up to date. And mind you, she was in her 70s herself, I think. I never met her. And she sort of wanted to change everything immediately. So I think the whole school was thrown into a sort of state of confusion. And because I was just an invited guest, I didn't get invited. And of course, it was true you could criticize Guildhall because most of their guest directors and regular directors were middle-class, white and aging males. And I think there was a lot of, you know, we've got to have women, we've got to have multi-ethnic BAME people and so forth and so forth. So anyway, so The Crucible was almost the last production I did, but I think Year of Wonders came out just a little bit after that, the solo show. So, so that was my end, as it were, working for drama schools. It had been very interesting in all sorts of ways. But at the same time, I had been writing a second book.
Okay.
Now, a big part of my repertoire that had evolved very much early on with shared experience, doing Arabian Nights and Bleak House, and then doing A Handful of Dust and so forth and so on. I adored this whole world of adapting something else which was never meant to be put on stage and trying to find an equivalent form which matched the forms and techniques of that particular written work, fiction or biography or whatever it was, and transferring it onto the stage, not adapting it into a play, but trying to find a form on the stage that was unique for that particular material. Mm-hmm. Exploring narrative points of view, which very rarely can happen with a play, because we in the audience sit and we see it. It's usually third person. And even if there's a narrator, occasionally, you never quite see all the other characters through the narrator's eyes and so forth. So that was a huge exploration. And I love this work. And I've done a lot of workshops on storytelling, both narrating and exploring the capacity of a human being who was a performer, an actor, to do more than the already very onerous job of creating character, also being themselves, being a storyteller, being an MC, being a host, being a critic, being a commentator, playing multiple characters and different points of view, creating on this is mainly on an empty stage, creating scenery that wasn't there, creating music, working without any props or costumes or even musical instruments, but still creating music. And so it was a thrilling sort of gesture of admiration and the worth of actors that they could do all these things. They could take so many roles, you know. And it conformed to my idea that if you had actors, a story, and an audience, you didn't need anything else except the same space they were in and some lights so you could see each other, you know. And so that was the basis of it. But it needed a lot of techniques. And so I wrote another book called Then What Happens? Question mark. Then what? Then what happens? You know, good story. You want to know what happens next. And Nick Hearn printed that, and it came out about 4 years ago. I can peep and look, and it sold. It was their bestseller when it first came out. It was wonderful, but then it settled down. I thought it would be more attractive because I couldn't see any other book that dealt both with the actual storytelling and the adaptation, but it never quite took off. It's all right. It did, you know, it sells a few hundred books a year. I haven't covered my advance yet. I maybe never will. But it's there, and I'm very pleased with it. And I think it's quite a, you know, serious, good, useful book. And people who do use it like it very much. It's very detailed. It's very technical, but it's also about the philosophy and attitude to adaptations and looking at language and very much say what is the form of this novel, you know, and realizing that what is the most important thing in the theatre as a starting point is the sort of language that is being used. I know that sounds very retroactive, or no, not retroactive, but very sort of going backwards. You know, it's not about voice musical, but the way in which people speak informs everything else about attitude, style, heightening of the world, and so forth and so on. And so my choice of material is always very dominated by the language. And I suddenly realized, why is it I don't like some novels which are very popular, and why are there other novels I do like? And it's not the story or the characters particularly, it's the way in which the writer has put the words on the page. That's all I can say. It's a mystery. You know, it's the sequence, the way the words are laid out, the length of the sentences, the color. Yeah, I don't know. It is some books I read which people love, and I'm so bored. I can hardly go from one full stop to another capital letter to start another sentence. It's so, I find it so uninteresting. The language is so for me, inanimate, dull. I don't know, but so anyway, and so what's the language like? And if people are using language like that, and of course this applies to Shakespeare, if you're using language that's very heightened, that is in rhymed couplets, which has metaphors and similes, which has incredibly long thoughts that we no longer can cope with. What does that say about the people? How do they move? How do they take up space? If you are talking in that sort of way, can you slouch around the stage in an Armani suit, which a lot of Shakespeare productions now ask of the actors? No, there needs to be something else going on visually and spatially, you know. So all that went into it, also analyzing books and giving examples of different points of view and so forth and so on, and lots of exercises. And I also added to that a whole second half of technical of the book, a second part, which was dealing with creating ensembles, which wasn't in Different Every Night, which I also thought would have been very sellable. I think the main problem with that particular book was that nobody quite knew where it was, who it was for. So often it would be in the playwriting section, or it would be on the directing section, or sometimes on the acting section. It didn't quite find its place, and it was difficult to say. It was called Then What Happens, and the subtitle was Storytelling and Adaptation for the Theatre. So I don't know. Anyway, there it is. And I'm now toying with the idea of a third book, which is a bit remote. I've been playing with the idea for a long time, and I can't quite grab it, but there's something hovering there. So, okay, so that takes us more or less up to date.
Right. Okay. Well, listen, I'm going to bring this little section to a close. And I know that we've got a lot more that we are going to be talking about. Stick with us, anybody who's watching. But for now, I'm going to bring that one to a close and see you again in a while.
Okay, it's not quite up to date.
You're going to put an addendum into this now, are you?
Well, this Zoom.
Okay, let's leave that. Let's leave that and we'll talk again. All right. See you in a sec. Bye. Thank you for watching. And I hope you enjoyed that chat. And if you did, would you press the like button and also the subscribe button? That would be great. And if you wanted to be given alerts to when the next one is happening, just press the bell button. If you want to put any comments or any questions underneath here, underneath the video, please do. And at some point I will re-interview Mike, as it were, and put some of these questions to him. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.